Hi everyone. I've created this quick video in an attempt to clear up the IRS rules for claiming a dependent on your United States federal income tax return. If you're wondering whether you can claim a person in your life as a dependent, you might feel a bit lost with all the rules. However, for most people, it boils down to a few simple questions which I present here. Note that you can also use this flowchart to determine if you can be claimed as a dependent by someone else, such as your parent. Just answer these questions from their perspective about yourself. Now, if you're trying to determine if you can claim a person as a dependent, first come two simple questions: the joint return test and the citizen or resident test. In order to claim someone as a dependent, that person cannot be married and filing a joint return with a spouse. Now, they may be married and filing a single return, and that's okay, but they cannot be filing a joint return with a spouse. Next, the person you claim as a dependent has to be a U.S. citizen, resident alien, national, or a resident of Canada or Mexico. Then come the two main questions that usually trip people up. Is the person a qualifying child? If not, they could still be a dependent if they are a qualifying relative. If one of those two is true, you go on to the last test and they can be claimed as a dependent. If they are not a qualifying child or a qualifying relative, they cannot be claimed as a dependent. The last test, as long as they're a qualifying child or relative, is the dependent taxpayer test. You just have to confirm that you yourself cannot be claimed as a dependent on anyone else's tax return in order to claim a dependent of your own. Alright, so now all we have to do is get into a little bit more details on what it means to be a qualifying child or qualifying relative. In order to be a qualifying child, the person must be your child, stepchild, sibling, half-sibling, step-sibling, or a descendant of one of those, for example, a grandchild. Next, the person must be 18 or younger at the end of the year on December 31st. However, if they're a student, they're allowed to be up to 23. If they turn 24 in the year of the tax return, they do not pass the age test. Next is the residency test. The person must have lived with you for more than half the year, although there are excuses for temporary absences such as education, military service, and things like that. And finally, the support test. The person must not have provided more than half of his or own support for the year. If you can answer yes for all these questions, the individual passes and is considered a qualifying child, and as long as you're not a dependent taxpayer, you can claim them. However, if the individual fails any one of these tests, you may still be able to claim them as a dependent if they are a qualifying relative. However, the term qualifying relative is confusing because they don't actually have to be your relative. The first test is the member of household or relationship test. The person must live with you for the whole year as a member of your household, or be your child, stepchild, foster child, grandchild, sibling, half-sibling, step-sibling, parent, grandparent, step-parent, niece, nephew, uncle, aunt, child-in-law, sibling-in-law, or parent-in-law. So you'll note that as long as a person lives with you for the whole year as a member of your household, they may be a qualifying relative, even if they are not one of these listed relations. However, the one that's going to trip up most people is the person must have a gross income less than $3,950. Now, this was for tax year 2014. The numbers may change slightly in future years, but still, the person must make very little money in order to be considered a qualifying relative. And third, the individual must have more than half of their total support provided by you. If all three of these tests are passed, and you are not a dependent on anybody else's tax return, then you can claim this individual as a dependent. So that's really all there is to it. Of course, there are a lot of caveats, and the IRS spells out all these special cases in their documentation, such as Publication 501. Foster children, kidnapped children, death of a child, shared custody, all these sorts of things. If you have any of these special cases, you should refer directly to the IRS literature. However, for most people, this flowchart will be adequate to determine whether someone can be claimed as a dependent. So that's it. Hopefully this video helped clear up some of the confusing rules about how to claim someone as a dependent on your tax return.